This video I'm going to be comparing the Swamp Thing franchise to the Crow franchise. One big difference between these two is a new Crow movie did come out this year. Unfortunately, it didn't do very well. The last Swamp Thing movie came out back in 1989. That's a long time ago. When you look at highest score for each franchise of Crow, the movie of Brandon Lee that came out in 1997, I think, has an 87%. With Swamp Thing, the first movie from Wes Craven, has a 60%. But then when you look at lowest score, with Crow, one of these movies, Wicked Prayer, has a 0%. With Swamp Thing, the sequel Return of Swamp Thing has a 44%. When you look at average score with Crow, you have an average of only 28. Swamp Thing is an average of 52. Swamp Thing wins here. Then when you look at gap between lowest and highest score, you have a gap of 87 in the case of Crow, a gap of only 16 in the case of Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing wins again, so it's won every round so far except one, means Swamp Thing is going to win no matter what. And in this case, it's not actually difficult for me at all. I would say that even though you have one Crow movie that definitely was a success, that's for sure. It made Brandon Lee this really well known actor because he tragically died while making that movie. And so it very much is his legacy. But it seems to me like outside of that one movie, none of the other ones have been very good. And while we got a new Crow movie this year, unfortunately, it didn't really leave much of a mark or impact. That's the impression I've gotten based on things I've heard about it, videos I've watched about that movie. It just feels to me like you got this new Crow film that's just utterly bland, generic, forgettable streaming movie that no one really cares about, that people are going to forget about pretty quickly and not really talk about for very long at all, because it doesn't really do enough different to actually make it interesting, make it stand out, or be memorable. So it just comes off as utterly generic, utterly watered down. Like it doesn't really have much at all to offer. So I don't think that people are going to be talking about this one for very long. Just like how I don't think anyone's really talking about City of Angels, Salvation, or Wicked Prayer. In the case of Swamp Thing, seems to me like there was a dip in quality when you headed into the second movie, but it's not as big of a dip as you've had with the Crow franchise. Seems to me like with that first movie, it's an interesting movie because you get to see a comic book film from this director Wes Craven, who's well known as a horror director, especially because he's the one behind the Scream franchise, which is a pretty well known horror franchise, especially considering that a new movie came out only last year and was well received. So it's interesting to get this different kind of comic book movie that's not the same as like a Marvel movie, for example. And then seems to me like Return to Swamp Thing is just not as well done, not as interesting as the first film. But while Crow is, in a sense anyway, more relevant because technically a new movie came out this year, it just doesn't really have much of leave much of a mark at all. Whereas Swamp Thing hasn't had that same kind of problem. You're putting out multiple movies that don't really leave much of a mark at all. So I would definitely say it's the superior franchise. That'll be it for this one.